The cabin was quiet, the soft rustle of seatbelts and zippers marking the only sound as passengers settled in. But the peace didn't last. A flight attendant's voice sliced through the silence, calm but edged with authority. She stood before a woman dressed in elegant navy, seated near the front. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said with a clipped smile, "but I'll need to ask you to move to the back." Heads turned. A wave of whispers rolled down the aisle. The woman, composed and silent, rose without a word. She collected her belongings with grace, her movements fluid, and began her walk toward the rear, dignified, calm, unwavering. But no one on board, especially not the flight attendant, could have imagined that in just 4 minutes everything was about to change. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you're ready for a powerful story filled with twists, life lessons, and a dose of justice, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what's coming. The terminal was buzzing with the usual energy of a major travel hub. Voices layered over rolling suitcases, announcements echoing overhead. Some passengers were dreaming of sandy beaches, others glued to their laptops, already halfway into the workday. Celeste Moore walked through the bustling corridor with quiet confidence. Her ivory blazer hugged her shoulders just right, and the polished leather bag on her arm added to her poised appearance. She wasn't in a hurry. She walked with the air of someone who had traveled often, familiar, calm, observant. A few fellow travelers returned her warm smile, but she kept mostly to herself. Boarding was announced, and Celeste handed her ticket to the gate agent, who offered a pleasant nod. "Enjoy your flight?" the agent said. "Thank you," Celeste replied with a kind nod before stepping onto the jet bridge, her heels making soft clicks against the metal floor. She entered the aircraft and exchanged pleasantries with the cabin crew at the door. Then she made her way to her first-class seat, placing her bag overhead and settling by the window with effortless composure. Moments later, a man entered, his charcoal suit crisp, his stride purposeful. He barely looked around, but his eyes landed briefly on Celeste. The glance was fleeting, but there was something unspoken in it. A recognition, a familiarity that passed unnoticed by everyone else. As the final few passengers boarded, a flight attendant, Aaron Saunders, moved briskly through the cabin with a clipboard in hand. Her brows were furrowed, her steps quick, tension drawn across her face. She stopped abruptly, eyes narrowing at the sight of Celeste. Frowning slightly, Aaron double-checked her chart. Then, wearing a tight-lipped smile, she approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone polite but clipped. "There seems to be a seating error. May I see your boarding pass?" Celeste looked up, her expression calm yet questioning. Without hesitation, she handed the pass over. Aaron glanced at it, her brow tightening. "There's been a mistake," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "This seat was reserved for another passenger. I'll need you to move to a different one." Celeste's smile remained polite but firm. "There's no mistake," she said evenly. "This is the seat I was assigned." Aaron hesitated. Her eyes flicked from Celeste to the seating chart. "Perhaps you meant to book a seat in the main cabin?" she offered, voice still sweet but with a pointed edge. "No," Celeste replied, her tone composed. "I booked this seat specifically." Around them, murmurs started to rise. Passengers shifted in their seats, watching the exchange. Aaron, now visibly uneasy under their gazes, gestured vaguely toward the back. "There's a seat closer to the rear," she said. "It'll be just as nice." Celeste remained unshaken. "I'd prefer to remain here," she replied, her voice steady but with a quiet steel underneath. The tension thickened. Aaron's cheeks flushed. She leaned closer, her smile now tighter. I'm afraid I have to insist. Please collect your things." For a long moment Celeste said nothing. Then she stood, her movements slow, controlled. She reached for her bag and stepped into the aisle. As she passed through the cabin, her gaze met the eyes of the man in the charcoal suit. He was watching her, intently. He said nothing, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something restrained. Celeste kept walking, head held high, as murmurs followed her down the aisle, a mix of curiosity, judgment, and silent unease. She reached her new seat near the back, settled in with quiet composure, and turned to look out the window. Her expression was serene, but her thoughts were racing. Meanwhile, Erin returned to the front, smoothing her uniform with relief. She believed she'd handled the situation, but she had no idea what kind of storm she had just stirred. Erin straightened her uniform as she moved through the cabin, unaware of the ripple effect she had just caused. The passengers around her began to settle into their seats as the hum of conversation dimmed. Overhead, bins snapped shut, seatbelts clicked, and the cabin returned to a low, rhythmic murmur. At the front, Erin stood tall once again, her voice confident as she led the safety demonstration. The tension she'd carried earlier now seemed replaced by a crisp professionalism, though beneath it all, a flicker of smugness lingered in her expression. She glanced briefly toward the back of the plane where Celeste now sat, her posture straight and serene. Celeste looked unbothered, composed, but there was a depth to her stillness that filled the space around her, like a quiet storm waiting to unfold. Up in the first row, the man in the sharp suit reclined slightly, his movements deliberate and calm. Though his face was unreadable, his eyes occasionally shifted toward Celeste. There was a quiet intensity about him, his presence drawing subtle curiosity from nearby passengers. Who was he? A government official? A high-powered CEO? The mystery surrounding him only deepened as whispers circled among those nearby. As the final announcements played, Erin busied herself with final checks. She walked past the first-class seats, and as she did, the man raised his hand slightly to get her attention. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice calm but unmistakably commanding. "May I have a glass of water, please?" Erin nodded instantly, snapping into form. "Of course, sir," she said with a professional smile and hurried off toward the galley. As she poured the water, her mind drifted, again, toward Celeste. Something about her still gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't quite name. When Erin returned, she offered the man the glass. He nodded in thanks, but just as she turned to leave, he spoke again. "That woman," he said, his voice low, his eyes motioning subtly toward the rear of the cabin. "The one you had moved? What was the issue?" Erin froze, her cheeks warming under the question. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in slightly. "Oh, it was just a mix-up," she said, trying to sound casual. She seemed a little unsure about her seat. "I figured it was best to clear it up quickly." The man's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Unsure, you say?" he repeated. His voice was still neutral, but there was something sharp behind it now. Erin shifted uncomfortably, sensing a change in the air. "Yes, sir. Just a minor misunderstanding," she replied, her voice more tentative now. He nodded slowly, his gaze still on her, then leaned back in his seat. "Interesting," he said quietly. Erin stood awkwardly for a second longer, then excused herself and returned to the galley, the weight of his words lingering in her chest. Something about that conversation unsettled her. Toward the back, Celeste remained by the window, her expression peaceful. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, but her eyes revealed a quiet awareness. She wasn't angry. She was watching and waiting. The plane began to taxi down the runway, engines roaring as momentum built. As the wheels lifted from the ground, Celeste closed her eyes briefly. She breathed out slowly, composed as ever, but her mind replayed every moment. Aaron's clipped voice, the staring passengers, the intense gaze of the man in the suit. As the seatbelt sign switched off, the cabin began to wake up. Soft conversations resumed. Beverage carts clinked and rolled through the aisles. Aaron moved with practiced grace, but there was something different in her rhythm now, a stiffness in her shoulders, a falter in her step. The conversation with the man in the suit had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, in first class, the man, still a mystery to those around him, scrolled slowly through his phone, pretending to read emails. But his focus wasn't on the screen. It drifted once more to the back, where Celeste sat. His jaw tensed slightly. He had seen everything. The murmurs, the way eyes followed Celeste as she was asked to move. He had said nothing then, not because he didn't care, but because the moment wasn't right. He believed in letting people reveal their true colors. And Aaron had. As Aaron passed the rear section again, she avoided Celeste's gaze. But Celeste noticed her. She noticed everything. For just a second, her eyes followed Aaron, not with hostility, but with presence. Enough to make Aaron feel it. Celeste didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to argue. Her silence was more powerful than any confrontation could ever be. At that moment, a jolt of turbulence shook the plane. A few passengers gasped and grabbed their armrests. Celeste's hand instinctively gripped hers, but quickly loosened. Her composure never broke. She stared calmly out the window, unmoved by the storm outside, or the one slowly gathering within. The sudden jolt of turbulence startled a few passengers, drawing soft gasps across the cabin. Celeste Moore instinctively gripped the armrest, but only for a heartbeat. She relaxed just as quickly, her expression unchanged, her composure intact. Across the aisle, a woman leaned in slightly, her voice hesitant. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone uncertain but curious. "I saw what happened earlier, with the seating." That didn't seem right. Celeste turned to her with a gentle, knowing smile. "People often act on assumptions," she replied, her voice steady. "That's just human nature." The woman blushed, a little embarrassed, and nodded. "Well, I think you handled it beautifully. I don't know if I could have done the same." Celeste gave a small nod of gratitude but said no more. The moment ended, but it left a mark, the kind that lingers. What no one noticed was that Nathan Grant, the man in the charcoal suit, had risen from his seat. His movements were unhurried, casual, just another passenger stretching his legs. But there was purpose behind every step as he made his way toward the back. Eyes followed him again, just like when he first boarded. He moved with quiet authority, the kind that drew attention without demanding it. As he reached Celeste's row, a faint smile touched his lips. Soft, affectionate, resolute. He bent slightly, his eyes meeting hers. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low, but laced with genuine concern. Celeste looked up and smiled back, calm as ever. "Yes," she said, "I'm fine." The interaction was brief, barely a few seconds, but it stirred a fresh wave of murmurs among passengers nearby. Who was he? What was his connection to the woman who'd been asked to move? Near the front of the plane, Aaron Saunders had just stepped into the aisle when she noticed him standing beside Celeste. Her breath caught. Something about the scene, his posture, his familiarity with her, sent a cold rush through her veins. The cart in her hands felt heavier now, harder to steer. She couldn't look away. Who is he? Why does he look at her like that? The smugness she'd felt earlier evaporated into a haze of uncertainty. Erin quickly turned away, pushing the cart forward, trying to shake the unease tightening in her chest. Nathan leaned in again, speaking quietly, his voice too low to carry to the surrounding seats. But the tone was unmistakable, close, familiar, protective. Celeste responded with a soft nod, her expression warm but restrained. To the outside eye, it may have seemed like nothing, but to those who were watching closely, something had shifted. Nathan straightened, adjusted his jacket, and let his gaze briefly drift over the nearby passengers. The look was subtle, but it held a weight, a silent signal that he had seen enough. "If you need anything," he said to Celeste, just loud enough for others to hear, "you know where I am." With that, he turned and walked calmly back toward the front of the plane. The murmurs were immediate. "Do you think they know each other? He must be someone important, the way he talked to her. Maybe he's her boss, or something more." The whispers rolled through the rows like a slow wave. At the front, Erin felt them too. The eyes, the shift, the judgment. She could sense it building around her like pressure in the cabin. Her fingers clenched around the service cart as she veered into the galley, needing a moment to breathe. Back in her seat, Celeste remained poised, unbothered by the rumors, unaffected by the attention. But beneath her stillness was a spark of quiet satisfaction, because the narrative was beginning to change. She adjusted her seatbelt with intention, as though readying herself for the next part of the journey. Meanwhile, Nathan returned to his seat and settled back in, his presence altering the atmosphere of first class. Passengers exchanged meaningful glances now, whispering less about who he was and more about what they had just seen. In the galley, Erin scrambled to compose herself. She poured drinks mechanically, her mind far from the task. Just then, the co-pilot stepped inside, his voice casual as he leaned against the counter. "Busy day, huh?" Erin nodded stiffly, forcing a smile. "Just the usual," she replied, her voice tight. The co-pilot hesitated. Then, lowering his voice slightly, he said, "I saw what happened earlier, with the woman you asked to move." Erin's stomach sank. Her smile faded. She looked at him sharply, defensively. "What about it?" The co-pilot shrugged, his tone unreadable. "It's probably not my place, but I think you should know." He paused, glancing toward the first-class cabin. "She's not just any passenger." "It's not really my place," the co-pilot said, his voice low. "But you should know, she's not just any passenger." Erin Saunders' heart skipped a beat. Her thoughts raced to catch up. "What do you mean?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The co-pilot glanced casually toward first class, his eyes settling on the man in the tailored suit. "You'll figure it out soon enough," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. And with that, he pushed off the counter and walked away, leaving Erin alone with a sudden sense of dread pressing in around her. In the rear of the cabin, Celeste Moore sat in silence, her eyes on the blue stretch of sky outside. Her reflection flickered faintly in the window, serene on the surface, but behind it her mind was alert, precise. She had long ago learned that patience was not weakness, but power. And now she could feel it, the moment building like a quiet storm, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's right overhead. The flight continued smoothly. The hum of engines filled the air as drinks and snacks were handed out. Erin tried to stay focused, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the co-pilot's words. Her eyes stole a glance toward first class. The man, still calm, still unreadable, sat with a drink in one hand and his phone in the other. Every now and then he looked toward the back, his face giving away nothing. But to Erin, the silence felt louder than anything else. Her chest tightened, an unease growing with every minute. The murmurs among passengers hadn't gone away either. In fact, they'd grown quieter, but more intense. Those near Celeste whispered in hushed tones, sneaking glances her way as though trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. Celeste, however, remained perfectly still. She didn't shrink from the attention, nor did she welcome it. Her gaze remained out the window, focused on the endless sea of clouds, a picture of control. And somehow her stillness only made the mystery deeper. Up in first class, Nathan Grant placed his phone on the tray table and pressed the call button. Erin's heart stopped when she saw the light above his seat blink on. Another attendant stepped forward to respond, but Nathan lifted his hand, signaling her to wait. "I'd like to speak to her," he said, nodding toward Erin. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She adjusted her blazer, trying to look composed as she walked slowly down the aisle toward him. Her smile was automatic now, but it felt brittle. "How can I help you, sir?" she asked, voice wavering ever so slightly. Nathan didn't return the smile. He simply gestured to the seat beside him. "Please, have a seat." Erin froze, glancing around the cabin. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not really supposed to—" His voice cut in, quiet but firm. "It's important." Reluctantly, Erin sat, her posture stiff, like she was bracing for impact. Around them, a few passengers subtly leaned in, sensing something was happening, even if they didn't know what. Nathan leaned forward, his tone low but unwavering. "Do you know who I am?" Erin blinked, her confidence starting to fracture. I'm not sure," she stammered. A faint smile tugged at Nathan's lips, though there was no humor in it. "I'm Nathan Grant, CEO of Horizon Air." His voice was calm, measured, but each word landed like a gavel. Erin's breath caught, her face drained of color. I didn't know," she whispered. Nathan's expression didn't change. "The woman you sent to the back of the plane," he continued. "That's my wife." His words struck like thunder, quiet yet deafening. "Do you have any idea how unacceptable that was?" Erin's fingers dug into the edges of her apron. Her thoughts spiraled as panic clawed its way up her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but Nathan raised his hand. "Don't explain," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm looking for accountability." The air in the cabin shifted. Passengers seated nearby exchanged wide-eyed glances. Farther back, heads subtly turned, sensing something significant unfolding. Erin nodded, barely able to speak. I'm so sorry, sir," she managed. "I didn't realize—" "That's the problem," Nathan interrupted, his tone quieter now, but sharp as glass. "You didn't realize, because you didn't bother to look deeper. You made assumptions." Erin blinked away the tears threatening to surface. She forced herself to meet his eyes, though it felt like standing under a spotlight. Nathan finally leaned back in his seat, the disappointment in his expression far more painful than anger. "You're lucky," he said at last, "that my wife is more gracious than most. But this won't be forgotten." He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Erin remained seated for a moment, her mind spinning, her pride in pieces. When she finally rose and returned to the galley, it felt like her legs had turned to stone. The whispers followed her. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her shoulders with every step. Back in her seat, Celeste watched the clouds roll by. She smiled, softly, quietly, as Nathan returned to first class. She didn't need to say a word. The moment spoke for itself. Celeste Moore didn't need to say a word. The balance of the entire flight had shifted. The quiet dignity she had held from the moment she stepped on board now glowed like a beacon, subtle but impossible to ignore. In the galley, Erin Saunders stood motionless, her fingers trembling around the rim of a plastic cup she had no intention of drinking from. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and her thoughts spun in endless loops, replaying that conversation with Nathan Grant, the CEO of Horizon Air. Over and over. How had she missed it? How could she have been so wrong? She leaned against the counter, praying no one would notice the tears brimming in her eyes. In the main cabin, Celeste sat in the same poised silence she'd maintained all along. There was no smugness in her expression, no air of superiority. She appeared more interested in the clouds outside the window than in the whirlwind unfolding around her. But those seated nearby saw something else. They whispered quietly, stealing glances. Their eyes moved from Celeste to the front of the plane, then back again, finally understanding what they had witnessed. A quiet strength few could explain, but none could ignore. A middle-aged man seated across the aisle leaned toward her, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low. "I just wanted to say, it's remarkable how calm you've been through all of this." Celeste turned to him, her gaze warm but unwavering. "Thank you," she replied softly, her tone gracious but reserved. He hesitated, then asked, "Forgive me, but that man in first class, he's your husband, isn't he?" Celeste gave a small, knowing smile. "He is." The man let out a slow breath, shaking his head in quiet awe. "And you didn't say anything when the flight attendant asked you to move? Why not?" Celeste's eyes lowered to her hands, which rested gently in her lap. "There's strength in silence," she said. "Sometimes letting others reveal who they are says more than words ever could." The man leaned back, clearly moved by her response. "You're a better person than most," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Meanwhile, Erin finally stepped out of the galley. Her movements were slower now, unsure. The confidence that once carried her through the cabin with ease had dissolved. She held a tray of drinks, but her rhythm was off, her presence no longer crisp and composed, but vulnerable and raw. As she passed by Celeste's row, her hand trembled slightly. She paused, lips parted, as if trying to form the words. Celeste looked up, her face unreadable. The silence between them stretched thin, thick with everything left unsaid. Finally, Erin managed a whisper. "I'm so sorry." Celeste studied her for a moment, her gaze unreadable, then gave a small, respectful nod. "I hope you've learned something." Her voice wasn't harsh. It didn't need to be. The weight of those words cut sharper than any reprimand. Erin nodded quickly, her eyes welling again. She turned away before the tears could fall and disappeared down the aisle, leaving Celeste to return to her window, calm as ever. Up in first class, Nathan sat with his phone in hand, answering emails as if nothing had happened. His face was composed, his energy focused. The confrontation had been resolved, at least for now. A flight attendant approached hesitantly, offering him a drink or anything else he might need. Nathan declined with a courteous smile, but didn't engage. He, too, had turned the page. The rest of the cabin had taken on a strange stillness, like the aftermath of a storm. The tension lingered, not loud, but present. A quiet reflection had settled over the flight. Everyone now knew who Celeste and Nathan were, and more importantly, what they stood for. Some passengers avoided eye contact with Celeste entirely, guilt etched into their silence. Others glanced at her with newfound admiration. But Celeste remained unchanged, graceful, centered, unshaken. The aircraft cruised at altitude, the hum of the engine masking whispers and subtle movements. Erin, still reeling, tried to lose herself in routine, but her steps no longer carried confidence, only weight. She avoided Celeste's row and the eyes of other passengers, her posture smaller than before, as though carrying something heavy inside her. The warmth she once projected now felt rehearsed, hollow. Every interaction was a quiet trial, every moment a reminder. A few rows ahead of Celeste, a young woman leaned toward her travel companion, whispering behind her hand. "She's his wife," she murmured. "The CEO's wife." Her companion's eyes widened. "No way. And that flight attendant treated her like that? It's embarrassing." Celeste heard them. She always did, but she didn't react. Instead, she shifted slightly in her seat, her fingertips gently tracing the edge of the tray table. Calm, present, vigilant, not out of pride, but because she knew. Moments like these weren't just about now. They were about what came next. Celeste Moore ran her fingers along the edge of the tray table, her gaze steady, her mind calm, but alert. She didn't need to justify what had happened. She never had. She'd learned long ago that true strength often lies in restraint. At the front of the cabin, Nathan Grant observed quietly, his eyes moving from row to row with purpose. He took everything in, the way some passengers shifted uncomfortably, the way Aaron Saunders seemed to grow smaller with every pass through the aisle, and how Celeste remained the unwavering center in it all. He had always admired that about her, how she could disarm a situation with silence, how she could turn discomfort into understanding without ever raising her voice. Erin found herself near Celeste's row again, delivering drinks to a passenger just 2 seats ahead. She hesitated, her eyes lingering on Celeste like a silent plea. Unable to move on, she finally stopped, the tray in her hands trembling ever so slightly. "Ma'am," she said quietly, barely above a whisper, "I know I already apologized, but I need to say it again. I'm truly sorry for the way I treated you." Celeste looked up slowly, her face calm, unreadable. She allowed the silence to stretch, a silence that said more than any lecture could, before responding. "Do you understand why it was wrong?" she asked softly. Erin blinked, startled by the question. She nodded, breath catching in her throat. "Yes," she said. "I judged you. I made assumptions without knowing anything about you. It was unfair and deeply disrespectful. I can't take it back, but I will do better." Celeste's gaze softened slightly. "Apologies are a beginning," she said. Her voice was gentle but firm. "But change is what matters." Erin nodded again, tears threatening. She lingered, as if waiting for more, but Celeste had already turned her eyes back to the window, a quiet but clear signal. The conversation was over. Erin stepped away, her heart heavy, but her resolve stronger than before. She had work to do, not just for the remainder of the flight, but beyond it. In first class, Nathan glanced at his watch. The descent had begun, but his thoughts remained with Celeste. He leaned back, a subtle smile forming. She had handled everything as he knew she would, with elegance, strength, and a quiet wisdom that left a mark on everyone she encountered. It wasn't pride, he felt, because she was his wife. It was pride in who she was. The captain's voice came over the speaker, announcing their approach. The mood in the cabin began to shift again, this time from reflection to anticipation. Books were tucked away, headphones removed, seats adjusted, but the weight of what had happened earlier still lingered like a silent shadow. Erin, jolted from her thoughts by the announcement, straightened her uniform and tried to refocus. Yet her mind kept circling back to that final exchange with Celeste. Every word echoed with truth and consequence. Celeste, as composed as ever, placed her book back into her handbag. Her hands moved with slow precision, her mind calm, focused. She didn't need to look up to feel the glances that continued to flicker her way. Across the cabin, Nathan, now upright, signaled a flight attendant. It wasn't Erin who responded. A younger woman stepped forward, eager, bright-eyed. She leaned in as Nathan spoke softly, nodding a few times before walking quickly toward the cockpit. Erin saw the exchange and felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She couldn't hear what Nathan had said, but she didn't have to. The quiet authority in his presence, the subtle control in his manner, it was clear. He had taken further steps, and whatever those steps were, she knew. They would affect her. The city skyline came into view beyond the clouds, its outline growing sharper as the plane made its descent. The captain's voice returned, calmly reminding passengers to prepare for landing. Celeste fastened her seatbelt without hurry. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing was steady. She could feel Nathan watching her from across the cabin. She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Their bond was strong enough that she could feel his silent reassurance even without a glance. The wheels touched down gently. A soft bump. A hum of deceleration. The cabin stirred, passengers stretching, checking their phones, reaching for bags. But for a few people on board, this flight hadn't just reached a destination. It had delivered a lesson. Erin moved to the front of the aircraft, positioning herself by the door, ready to assist with disembarkation. Her body moved through the familiar motions, but her thoughts were far from routine. Each step, each moment, felt different now, heavier, slower, filled with the quiet weight of awareness. She could feel it. This flight would stay with her, long after the passengers had gone. As passengers began to disembark, Erin Saunders stood near the front of the cabin, trying her best to appear composed, but every movement felt stiff, rehearsed. Her face, once a mask of confidence, now betrayed the storm churning inside her. The door opened with a soft mechanical hiss, and the first-class passengers slowly gathered their belongings. Nathan Grant stood, his tall frame immediately drawing quiet attention. He retrieved his briefcase with calm precision and exchanged a few polite words with the passenger beside him. Then he moved into the aisle. Erin's breath caught. Her hands clutched the back of a nearby seat for balance as Nathan walked past her, without a glance. No words, no acknowledgement. But his presence alone sent a chill down her spine. Toward the back of the aircraft, Celeste Moore waited patiently for the rows ahead to clear. When Nathan reached her, his face softened. The earlier sharpness in his expression melted into something warm and familiar. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand. Celeste looked up, her lips curling into a quiet smile that needed no words. She slipped her hand into his, standing gracefully. The whispers began again as the couple made their way up the aisle, but they paid them no mind. They walked together, side by side, as if the world around them had faded away. As they passed Erin, Celeste offered a brief glance, just a small nod. No glares, no scolding, just a quiet acknowledgement. Nathan, focused entirely on his wife, didn't look at Erin at all, and that silence said everything. Celeste's grace had delivered a lesson more powerful than any public reprimand, and Nathan's silence forced Erin to sit with the weight of it. The couple stepped off the plane, their presence lingering long after they disappeared into the terminal. For Erin, the now empty aisle was a stark reminder, not just of the professional embarrassment, but of the missed opportunity to treat someone with basic dignity from the very start. The lesson was clear, and the cost was one she wouldn't forget. As the plane emptied row by row, Erin remained near the front, offering forced smiles and automatic farewells. "Thank you for flying with Horizon Air. Have a nice day." But each passenger's glance seemed to carry something unspoken. Judgment, disappointment, pity. Each one landed like a pinprick beneath her skin. She just wanted the flight to be over. In the rear cabin, Celeste rose from her seat with her usual quiet elegance. She collected her belongings with smooth, precise movements. Nathan stood waiting just beside her, steady as ever, a calm anchor in the still buzzing atmosphere of post-flight activity. Before leaving, Celeste turned and looked at her seat one last time. A soft, barely noticeable smile touched her lips. It was fleeting, but full of meaning. Nathan noticed. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently, leaning in close. Celeste's gaze was distant, thoughtful. "Just thinking," she replied, "about people and the choices they make." Nathan nodded slowly, offering his arm. Without hesitation, she placed her hand lightly on it, and together they began their final walk through the cabin. By then, most of the seats were empty, save for a few passengers still fumbling with bags overhead. The rest watched the couple with quiet fascination, unsure of exactly what they had just witnessed, but knowing it had meant something. Celeste and Nathan ignored the stares. Their presence moved through the aisle like a quiet force, elegant, assured, untouchable. At the front, Erin's heart pounded. She didn't need to turn around to feel them coming. She could feel their presence approaching, step by step. The tension in the air grew thick, pressing against her chest. Her mind raced, searching for the right words. But when they finally reached her, every sentence she had rehearsed vanished. Celeste's eyes met hers, calm, steady, silent. The silence stretched, long enough to feel like an eternity. Finally, Erin broke it. "Mrs. Grant," she stammered, voice trembling, I just wanted to say how truly sorry I am. For everything. For how I treated you." Nathan stood beside Celeste, his gaze on Erin, unreadable. He said nothing, just waited. Celeste tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing in quiet thought. "Do you understand what you're apologizing for, Erin?" she asked. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it was clear. Erin blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Yes, ma'am," she said quickly. "I shouldn't have judged you. I made assumptions, treated you differently. I wasn't professional. I was wrong." Celeste held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave a soft nod. "It's not just about professionalism," she said. "It's about respect. That's something we owe to everyone, not just those we think are important." Tears welled in Erin's eyes. She nodded again, voice breaking. "I understand. I really do. And I promise I'll do better." Celeste's expression softened, though her eyes remained sharp. "Good," she said simply, and with that she turned away. "I hope you truly do," Celeste Moore said softly, her voice calm but resolute. For a moment the air stood still. Then Nathan Grant, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and unmistakably authoritative. "Erin," he said, his gaze locked on her, "my wife has shown you more grace than most would have. I hope you recognize that. Not everyone is willing to teach through kindness. Take this moment, not as a reprimand, but as a chance to reflect and grow." Erin Saunders nodded quickly, her cheeks flushed, her eyes lowered. "Yes, sir. Thank you." With that, Nathan and Celeste stepped into the jet bridge. Almost instantly, whispers rippled through the terminal. Passengers, now fully aware of who the couple truly was, followed behind, some in stunned silence, others murmuring with wide eyes. But Celeste and Nathan walked on, unaffected by the chatter. Their pace was unhurried, their bond unshakable. Outside, a sleek black car waited at the edge of the tarmac. A uniformed driver stepped out and opened the door. Nathan offered his hand, helping Celeste into the car before joining her inside. As the door closed and the clamor of the airport faded behind them, he turned to her. His hand found hers, resting gently on top. "You handled that beautifully," he said, admiration woven through his voice. Celeste met his gaze, her smile soft but sure. "Sometimes," she said, "people need to see themselves through someone else's eyes. It's the only way they'll understand." Nathan nodded slowly. "True," he replied, "but it takes a rare kind of strength to lead with grace instead of anger." Celeste looked out the window as the car began to move. The streetlights blurred past them as the sky deepened into evening. Her mind drifted briefly, not to what she could have said, but to what she had chosen not to. She hadn't held on to resentment or indignation. Those things served no purpose. Instead, she carried something else, a quiet, powerful sense of peace. She knew her silence had spoken volumes, not just to Aaron, but to everyone who had witnessed that flight. The city skyline came into view, glowing under the golden hue of sunset. The car wove through the vibrant streets, past commuters and glowing storefronts. Celeste leaned her head back against the seat, her gaze thoughtful as it traced the movement beyond the glass. Her thoughts briefly returned to Aaron. Had she truly understood the lesson? Would she carry it forward, or let it fade with time? Beside her, Nathan seemed to sense her thoughts. He reached for her hand again, this time intertwining his fingers with hers. "She'll remember," he said quietly. "Maybe not everything, but that moment, it'll stay with her." Celeste turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You really think so?" Nathan nodded. "Moments like that leave marks. Some are small, others change everything." She studied him for a moment, taking in the quiet confidence in his eyes, the kind that came not from position or power, but from experience, from knowing what mattered. She squeezed his hand gently and leaned back, letting his words settle over her like warmth. Soon, the car pulled into the circular driveway of a sleek, glass-fronted building. It wasn't their home, but one of Nathan's private offices tucked away from the bustle of his main headquarters, a place for focus, for reflection. A staff member greeted them with a nod and led them to a private lounge on the top floor. The space was quiet and understated, plush seats, soft lighting, and massive windows that opened up to a sweeping view of the skyline. On the low table before them sat a tray of refreshments, and a folder stamped with the Horizon Air logo. Nathan gestured toward the seat beside him as he settled in. "I had this prepared earlier," he said, tapping the folder. "I wanted to go through it with you before we take any next steps." Celeste raised an eyebrow, intrigued. She opened the folder, scanning its contents carefully. It was a detailed internal report, employee feedback, customer complaints, and performance trends. As she read, her expression grew focused. She saw it immediately. Patterns, recurring issues, familiar blind spots, lapses in service, gaps in training, and more than one incident echoing what had unfolded on their flight. She looked up, her voice calm but certain. "It's deeper than that day. This isn't just about one person. It's systemic. This isn't just about one person, or one mistake," Celeste Moore said, her voice thoughtful but firm. "It's about a culture that allows those assumptions to go unchecked." Nathan Grant nodded, his expression serious. "Exactly. That's why I needed your perspective. You've always seen what others miss." Celeste leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder still open on her lap. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again, her voice steady. "Fixing this means going deeper. It's not enough to handle things case by case. You need to re-examine everything, how employees are trained, how they're taught to see and treat people. Respect shouldn't be a bullet point in a handbook. It has to be built into the culture." Nathan watched her with open admiration in his eyes. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say," he replied. "I've already scheduled a meeting with the executive team, and I want you there." Celeste blinked, surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because Nathan said simply. "You're the best example of what I want this company to represent. The strength, the poise, the way you handled yourself yesterday. It's everything I want our team to learn from. You don't just talk about respect, you live it." A warmth rose in Celeste's chest, part pride, part humility. She hadn't expected this, hadn't asked for it, but the sincerity in Nathan's voice was impossible to ignore. He wasn't asking her to stand beside him as his wife. He was asking her to lead. She nodded slowly, a small smile forming. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." Nathan smiled back, the relief and gratitude written clearly on his face. "Thank you," he said softly. They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling outside the wide windows. It was a quiet, reflective moment, one that spoke of possibility and quiet resolve. Celeste felt something shift within her, a new sense of purpose rising. The flight may have ended hours ago, but its lesson was still unfolding. As they left the lounge and stepped back into the car, Celeste felt a deep and steady sense of clarity. This wasn't just about what had happened to her. This was about what could come next, for the airline, for the people in it, and for anyone else who had ever been quietly dismissed. Beside her, Nathan remained a steady presence. They didn't speak much on the ride, but they didn't need to. They had turned a moment of injustice into something more, a movement, and they were ready to turn that spark into a flame. The next morning, sunlight poured into the tall windows of Nathan's private conference room, casting soft reflections on the polished wood of the long meeting table. Celeste stood by the glass, watching the city buzz below. The hum of distant traffic mixed with the muffled voices of staff moving through the halls. But in this room, there was a different energy. Today wasn't just another meeting. It was a chance to change something real. Nathan entered a moment later, a cup of coffee in one hand and a folder tucked beneath his arm. He paused at the sight of Celeste standing there, radiant in the morning light. "Nervous?" he asked, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Celeste turned toward him, returning the smile. "Not nervous," she said. "Just thinking." He set the coffee and folder down on the table, then moved to stand beside her. "Thinking about what?" She looked out the window again. "About how change starts," she said. "It's never easy, and it's rarely comfortable. But if it's done right, it lasts." Nathan nodded, his respect for her more visible than ever. "That's why I asked you to be here," he said. "You see things clearly, and you have the courage to say what needs to be said. That's what this company needs right now." Soon, the room began to fill. One by one, members of the executive team arrived. Their conversations were quiet, their expressions curious. Some greeted Celeste politely, others with faint surprise, clearly unsure of why she was present. But Nathan gave no explanation, at least not yet. When everyone was seated, he rose to stand at the head of the table. His presence alone commanded the room's full attention. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm but purposeful. "Today's meeting is about more than numbers or strategy. It's about something foundational, our culture, how we define it, how we live it, and, more importantly, where we've been falling short." He glanced toward Celeste, offering her a slight nod before continuing. "Yesterday, on a routine flight, my wife and I experienced something that brought a long-standing issue into sharp focus. It wasn't about policies or procedures. It was about people, about the way we treat one another." The room went quiet. Some executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others lowered their eyes. Nathan continued. "What happened on that flight wasn't just an oversight. It was a reflection of blind spots in how we train, how we supervise, and how we lead. It was a sign that something deeper needs to change." Then he gestured toward Celeste. "This is Celeste Moore. Many of you know her as my wife. But today, I want you to hear from her as someone who has a unique perspective, one we would be foolish not to listen to." Celeste rose from her seat. There was no hesitation, no nervousness, only purpose. She met the gaze of several executives before speaking, her voice firm and clear. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said. "I'm not here to criticize or assign blame. I'm here to offer a perspective, a reminder, really, of how powerful respect can be, and how damaging it is when it's missing." "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here," Celeste Moore began, her voice steady, warm, and composed. "I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm here to offer a perspective, a reminder of how powerful respect can be, and how damaging its absence is." She recounted the incident on the flight with clarity and restraint, never naming Aaron Saunders with hostility, but painting the moment with honest detail. She spoke about the danger of unchecked assumptions, how they don't just erode individual trust, but can slowly corrode an entire culture. Her tone remained graceful throughout, but there was weight behind every word. Even the more skeptical executives found themselves listening, drawn in by her calm strength. "It's not just about telling people to follow rules," Celeste continued. "It's about helping them understand why those rules matter, about teaching empathy, encouraging awareness, and being willing to take accountability when we fall short." When she finished, the room was still. Her words hung in the air like a silent challenge, one that couldn't be ignored. Nathan Grant stepped forward, his expression resolute. "Celeste is absolutely right," he said. "We can't let assumptions, complacency, or poor judgment define who we are." He paused, sweeping his gaze across the table. "Starting today, we'll be reevaluating our training programs, reworking our values, and holding ourselves and our teams to a higher standard. I expect each of you to lead by example. This isn't just a policy update, it's a culture shift, and it has to start now." Some executives nodded, others looked down, contemplative, but the message was clear. This wasn't optional. It was a mandate for real change. As the meeting adjourned, several members of the leadership team approached Celeste directly, thanking her for her honesty and offering their support. She accepted their words with humility, though she knew this was only the beginning. When the room finally cleared out, Nathan turned to her, pride shining in his eyes. "You were incredible," he said. Celeste gave a modest smile. "This is just the start. The real change comes in what we do next." Nathan nodded in full agreement. Together, they left the conference room, partners in purpose, ready to turn their shared vision into something lasting. In the weeks that followed, Horizon Air began a quiet but profound transformation. It started with tone and communication, then deepened into structure and training. What happened on that flight wasn't buried. It was used as a case study, not to single out Aaron, but to highlight the quiet harm of unconscious bias and the power of humility in correcting it. Celeste's story became a cornerstone of the airline's internal learning series, but she wasn't just a symbol. She insisted on being involved directly. She didn't want to be the figurehead. She wanted to be in the room. She attended sessions personally, sitting beside gate agents, flight attendants, and ground crew, not to lecture, but to listen and share. Her presence was calm. Her words were sincere. And because of that, employees who might have rolled their eyes at a corporate initiative instead leaned in, drawn in by the authenticity she brought to the room. One session stood out. It was held in a modest training center at a regional hub, far from the glossy corporate boardrooms. The room was filled with airline employees, many of whom had never seen Nathan Grant or Celeste Moore in person. Aaron Saunders sat quietly near the back. She had requested to attend, not out of obligation, but because she needed to. She sat stiffly, her posture tense, but her attention never wavered. The session began with a workplace culture trainer giving a brief introduction before inviting Celeste to the front. She stood with ease, her presence filling the room without effort, and then she shared her story again, not as a victim, but as someone who believed in growth. "What I want you to understand," Celeste said, her voice carrying clearly, "is that every interaction matters. Every word, every glance, every silence. You may not realize it at the time, but you leave something behind with every person you meet." She paused, letting the message settle. "This isn't about just doing your job, it's about how you do it. It's about why it matters." Then she added, "We all make mistakes. I'm not here to judge that. What defines us is how we respond, how we grow." In the back of the room, Erin shifted slightly. Her eyes never left Celeste. Each word struck something deeper, and this time she wasn't just hearing them, she was feeling them. Erin Saunders sat quietly as the final moments of Celeste Moore's talk echoed in her mind. Her expression was a blend of guilt and determination, an inner shift already taking shape. As the session wrapped, Celeste invited the room into open dialogue. At first, the employees hesitated, but soon one hand went up, then another. The quiet space filled with questions, stories, and real conversations about challenges, solutions, and how they could all move forward together. When the session ended, a line of employees formed, each one eager to thank Celeste personally. Their gratitude wasn't just polite, it was real, deep, earned. Erin waited until most of the room had emptied before she approached. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and her eyes brimmed with emotion. "Mrs. Moore," she said softly, her voice trembling, I don't know how to thank you, not just for forgiving me, but for everything you've done since. You didn't have to, but you did." Celeste studied her for a moment, then gave her a small, kind smile. "You're here," she said simply. "That tells me you've already started to grow. Keep going." Tears welled in Erin's eyes, but she nodded with quiet conviction. "I will," she whispered. As Erin stepped away, Nathan Grant entered the room. He had arrived toward the end and had quietly watched the final moments unfold. Now, as he took in the small groups of employees lingering, deep in conversation, he turned to Celeste with a proud smile. "You're making waves," he said, his voice low, filled with admiration. Celeste gave a small shrug, her eyes twinkling playfully. "Maybe. But it's not about me, it's about them. They're the ones who'll carry this forward." Nathan slipped an arm around her waist as they began walking through the hub, employees nodding and smiling respectfully as they passed. "True," he said, "but they wouldn't be doing it without you." Later that night, back at their home, the city lights sparkled like stars across the skyline. Celeste and Nathan sat side by side on their balcony, a quiet peace between them. Nathan raised his glass. "To the quiet revolution," he said with a smile. Celeste laughed softly, clinking her glass with his. "To respect and dignity," she added, "and to the courage it takes to make them real." As the night deepened, they sat in comfortable silence, unshaken, united. They both knew the journey was far from over, but they were ready to keep walking it, step by step, because what had started as a quiet moment on an airplane was now something much more. Months passed. The changes that Celeste and Nathan had sparked didn't fade. They grew, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. The airline's culture began to evolve, not through sweeping press releases or flashy PR, but through steady, heartfelt work, through new conversations, new expectations, new values. Erin's story, once just a private mistake, became part of a larger movement, not to shame her, but to remind others that growth begins when we're willing to face what we've done and choose better. At the heart of it all was a new initiative, the human element. Spearheaded by Celeste and fully backed by Nathan's executive team, the initiative focused on empathy, active listening, and cultural awareness. It wasn't a checkbox program, it was a mindset shift. Celeste worked with a diverse group of team members, flight crews, maintenance staff, frontline managers, to create workshops, panel discussions, and mentorship circles. She didn't just speak at people, she spoke with them, and they listened because she had lived it. One of the most visible moments came during the annual employee summit, held at a sprawling convention center. Thousands of Horizon Air staff filled the auditorium: pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, executives, office personnel. The energy buzzed with anticipation. Celeste stood backstage, calm and composed. When she stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause. She waited patiently for the crowd to settle, then began. "Thank you," she said, her voice warm and steady. "It's humbling to be here. But I want to start by saying something important. This is not about me. It's about us." A quiet fell over the room. It's about how we treat each other, how we show up, how we choose to see the people around us, not for what we assume they are, but for who they really are. She paused, letting the moment breathe. When I think about respect, I don't think about policy manuals or corporate slogans. I think about the small moments, the ones that are easy to overlook: a kind gesture, a second glance, a willingness to listen. Celeste's gaze moved across the sea of faces. Those moments may feel small, but they are the foundation of something much greater. And once more, she shared her story. But this time, it wasn't just a personal account. It was a lesson, a blueprint for what it means to lead with humility. As the last echoes of applause faded and the conference lights dimmed, Celeste Moore quietly stepped off the stage. Though the moment had been public, the change she had inspired was deeply personal, for herself, for those in the room, and for people far beyond it. She didn't walk away with fanfare. She walked away with purpose. Later, as she and Nathan Grant moved through the convention halls, dozens of employees stopped to greet them, not out of obligation, but from genuine connection. Stories were shared, hands were shaken, smiles exchanged. But more than anything, Celeste listened. She had always believed that leadership wasn't about speaking the loudest. It was about hearing what others were too afraid to say, and answering with grace. Back in their suite that evening, the hum of the city buzzed faintly through the windows. The glow of downtown lights spilled across the floor. Nathan poured 2 cups of tea instead of wine, a quiet celebration after a day that had felt like a turning point. Celeste stood at the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that all of this came from just one moment?" Nathan joined her, setting his cup beside hers. "One moment," he echoed. "One choice, one seat, and the courage not to fight it, but to rise above it." Celeste gave a small nod. It could have ended there, but it didn't. "No," Nathan said, "because you didn't let it." They sat together on the couch, not needing many words. The silence between them was full of pride, of understanding, of quiet anticipation for what was still to come. The next phase of the Human Element Initiative had already begun: peer mentorship, emotional intelligence training, and real-time empathy assessments across departments. But what struck Celeste most weren't the programs, it was the ripple effect. She heard it in hallway conversations, saw it in the way team leaders corrected themselves or paused to reconsider a tone or assumption. Change didn't need a spotlight to matter. It just needed roots. A few weeks later, during a casual lunch with a group of newer hires, a young employee leaned across the table. "I wasn't on that flight," she said to Celeste, "but I've heard the story, and I just want you to know. It changed the way I look at everyone I meet here." Celeste smiled gently. "That's all I ever hoped for," she replied. In the months that followed, Horizon Air saw more than just higher engagement scores or smoother customer satisfaction metrics. It saw a culture beginning to wake up. From casual conversations in break rooms to leadership discussions in boardrooms, people started to ask different questions. What can I do to make someone feel seen? Where have I missed an opportunity to show respect? How can I lead by listening first? And Celeste? She remained a quiet force in the background, not pushing, not preaching, but guiding. She never asked for praise. She simply showed up. With the same quiet dignity that had carried her down the aisle of that plane long before anyone knew her name. On the one-year anniversary of that flight, Nathan surprised her with a handwritten note tucked inside the pages of her journal. It read, "The world changed a little the day you chose not to raise your voice, but to hold your ground with grace. That choice lit a fire, and I get to watch you tend it every day. Thank you for never underestimating the power of a quiet stand." Celeste closed the journal slowly, her eyes shining, but steady. She wasn't done. There was more to build, more to teach, more to become. The final chapter hadn't been written, but the foundation was stronger than ever, and it had been built not on noise or power, but on the simple, steady truth that respect is a daily decision. It was the kind of truth that didn't fade with headlines. It lived in small moments, and in the hearts of those who chose to carry it forward.